Welcome, everybody. This is Renia Tyminski, and I'm welcoming you again to another episode of our Revillaging Podcast Series. I'm speaking from Prince Edward County in Eastern Ontario. This is the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, Anishnabeg, and Haudenosaunee people, who are also known as Mohawks. And this is an example of some of the Mohawk art that I buy from close to where I live. Today, I'm going to be talking to an old friend of mine from university, Amir Hussain, who's a highly accomplished professor of theology at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. And we're going to be talking about his background growing up in Canada and then moving to California, and what he sees now in terms of the education system for young people that he's teaching. So just by way of introduction, Amir has written a couple of books. The last one was Muslims in the Making of America, which was published in 2016. He's been on the editorial board of a number of publications and has a number of teaching awards, including one I noticed. I thought maybe I'd ask you about, Amir. That is from where is it? It was in 2001. It was the Outstanding Faculty Award by the National Center on Deafness.
Thanks for that, Renia. It was lovely to be able to talk with you. And so, yeah, just if we start with that, that was marvelous, because when I moved from Toronto to Los Angeles in 1997, I taught at California State University, Northridge. There's 23 campuses of the Cal State University system. Northridge is in the San Fernando Valley. So if you know American culture and know the Valley, that's what they're talking about there. But Northridge had the second largest population of deaf students behind Gallaudet University, which was exclusively, for deaf and hard of hearing students. So it was this amazing sort of moment of being in this university with about, 40,000 students, but 1,000 deaf, hard of hearing students. And, you're used to sort of diversity in the classroom in growing up in Toronto, moving to Los Angeles. What you're not used to is literally the first class I teach, there's an interpreter, there's a deaf student in the class. And so all of a sudden it's like, oh, how do I accommodate? I use a lot of video, I use a lot of music. Guess I need to have closed caption things. I guess, when I'm giving out a song, I guess I have to have, the music and the lyrics so that someone who's deaf can do this. And so that was in 1997. So it was a real honor a couple of years later to get this award from the students there, working and did amazing sort of work. Like in 2003, they were partnering, like I'm wearing this, headset microphone, which is all that common now. 2003 wasn't so common, but they were pioneering some really interesting stuff with IBM software around translations, because interpreters are maybe 75-80% accurate, especially when we're talking about technical things like the study of religion, where you're using this word in Arabic or that word in Greek, or this concept in Hinduism, which is completely different than that concept in Christianity. And so it was the beginnings of sort of voice recognition software. I had like a laptop. I would speak into the headset microphone, and behind me on the screen, the sort of words would project. This was the beginnings of the kind of machine learning, so I could teach the computer what I was saying. And you're using technical terms like Mahabharata. Well, it spells it out sort of phonetically. Then you say, no, here's how it's spelled. And so it knows that when I say this sound, this is what it looks like on the screen. And so the deaf and hard of hearing students would have, that, and then you go back over it, look at it, and then upload it to a web page so students could look at it, do the things. But so it was marvelous to be able to think about a population that we often don't think about, of deaf and hard of hearing students.
Absolutely, and really in education, that's really what I found it's all about, to approach it with maximum diversity in mind, and that really sharpens our teaching skills, no doubt about that. But can you tell us more about further back when you came to Canada? Were you
Sure.
7 or so? Is that
Four.
right?
So yeah, I was
4.
born in Pakistan. I was born in Lahore. My family came to Toronto in 1970. Sort of interesting story where my dad had gone to England because, of course, you had no trade schools, things like that in Pakistan. He came from a working class family. I mean, working class is the wrong word. The family was a little more successful because his dad, my grandfather, was like a builder, and so had a little bit of money. I mean, we would think of him as a developer these days, but in a small scale, like he wasn't building shopping malls, but building people's houses. But sent my father, and this was one of the values of the I pause here when I say one of the values of empire. There's lots of negative things with empire, but empire, Commonwealth, the fact that there's connections between England and Canada and Pakistan and that sort of thing. So my father had gone to London to be trained as a mechanic, an auto mechanic, and I think had really sort of enjoyed that. And this would have been, I'm thinking out loud now, this would have been London in like the early 1960s. So not London, the swinging 60s, London, 15 years
Mm.
after World War II and the kind of things there. But I think he found it a much more sort of liberating atmosphere than the sort of conservative Pakistan of my grandfather. And
Mm.
so when the opportunity came, he emigrated to not to London, but to Canada, to Toronto. But even then, like my dad tells the story of when he came, because he came like a couple of months before my sister and my mother and I. Just it's a typical immigrant thing where the man comes first to get a job and find a place to live and establish things, and then sends back for the
Mhm.
wife and kids. That he came through Montreal because in 1970 Pearson was not an international airport in Toronto. Toronto in 1970 was a provincial city. Montreal was the big city in Canada. And to think about that, the fact that, my dad didn't fly, from London to Toronto. He flew from London to Montreal and then I can't remember if he took the bus or the train, from Montreal to Toronto. So we came about 6 months later, grew up, moved to Parkdale. For those that aren't familiar with Toronto, Parkdale then is now is a place for new Canadians. It's a different kind of thing, very low socioeconomic status, very much working class sort of neighborhood. And it was really interesting because, like I said, 1970 in Toronto, there were less than, if you look at the national census of Canada as a Muslim, there were, I think, 34,000 Muslims in all of Canada in
Wow.
1970. You know, the last household census, over 1 million Muslims.
Right.
So you think about that, like, in 1970, Toronto wasn't just a white city, it was a British city. Like one of my dad's oldest friends was a Italian guy who worked with him on the assembly line. My dad worked in factories, and he talks about, literally being spit upon because he was like this, filthy Italian Catholic. You know, he's a white guy, but he's Italian and he's Catholic. He's not
Mhm.
British and Protestant. And
Mhm.
so I think Toronto was something like 85% British, like not 85% white, like 85% British, to the point that the Italian was the exotic other. Forget about the brown, Pakistani Muslim. And so, it was hard there because, I think about my parents coming from Lahore, tropical climate, the first sort of winter. What do you do with this kind of winter and this kind of cold and needing the kinds of things there, adjusting to the language? I mean, but both of my parents spoke English, again because of Commonwealth and Empire, but it wasn't their native language. How do you adjust? What do you do? And I'll tell one story here just as a way of illustrating this sort of changes. That my parents about 10 years ago, celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. And I was talking to a woman who's one of my mother's oldest friends, and I said to her, a Sikh woman, and I said to her, so I don't know this story. How did you meet my mother? I know you like, as long as I can remember, you've been friends with her, but how did you meet? And she said, well, it's an interesting story. It would have been about 1972. My sister, who would have been like 3 or 4 years old, was at Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto. For those who don't know Toronto, that's the major hospital for children. It's on University Avenue, one of the big, thoroughfares in the city. And my mother was outside because I guess my sister was in whatever procedure she was in. My mother's outside there, and she sees this woman with her husband walking like on the other side of University Avenue, so it's like 4 lanes of traffic, and they're speaking Punjabi because they're Sikhs, from the Punjab. I grew up in Lahore in the Punjab,
Mm-hmm.
and my mother, hasn't heard Punjabi in 2 years since she moved there. She literally like runs across the street to see who these people are that are speaking, these are brown people speaking her language. You go from that to now where the majority of folks in Brampton are Sikhs. You
Yes.
see a lot of people that look like me, South Asians in Toronto. I mean, for years Hockey Night in Canada did a broadcast in Punjabi.
Oh,
That was unheard of in 1970. So as you think about, you're literally crossing the street to find someone who speaks this language that you haven't heard in 2 years, to now, the leader of one of the major political parties in Canada is a Sikh who wears a turban. That would not have happened in 1970. So just this tremendous change, going from 35,000 Muslims, one mosque. So in Toronto, when we moved there was one mosque. That was the Jami Mosque, in the High Park area. So I never grew up going to the mosque because we lived away from there. Both my parents worked. There was one little store near the mosque that sold halal food. We never ate halal food because, you literally couldn't go there to buy the stuff. So you didn't eat pork, but you ate, what was available in the stores there. Now, there's dozens of mosques in the GTA now where my parents are retired now in Oakville. On one of the main streets, there's a couple of halal food places, meaning halal grocery stores. There's a bunch of stores that now serve halal. Sometimes it's sort of the secret, thing where it's not advertised out front, but you go in and you see the little halal in Arabic, there. That just was unthinkable in
mm-hmm.
1970, Toronto.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, the numbers in the city have increased incrementally over time, and there are different parts of Toronto that are ethnically identified. Primarily, it starts with the food, the restaurants,
Right.
that sort of thing, and so people are able to source what they're looking for themselves. But do you see that there's any sort of change in that now in terms of if you were a student growing up in the city, given all the changes that have occurred, what impact do you think that would have made on your own identity to
Yeah.
see yourself mirrored more often around you?
Oh yeah, it would have been very different because, again, so we grew up in Parkdale. Then my parents, moved to Oakville, and my dad got the job at the Ford plant, and the commute from Parkdale to Oakville, wasn't a great one. So we moved out to Oakville. But I was in a high school of maybe 750, 800 people. I can literally count on both hands the number of non-white folks that were there. The South Asians, including me, my sister, there was probably like literally two other families, a couple of Black kids, meaning of Jamaican ancestry, a couple of African kids, meaning from Africa, but that was it. You know, I look at my nephews now who are both they graduated from not the high school I went to, but different high school in Oakville, and majority of the kids are non-white. You come to university and you've got all these ethnic communities and differences that I just didn't have uh, uh, growing up. And so, I didn't really have any sort of Muslim friends until I came to university, because the Muslim friends I had were like the friends of my parents, the children of my parents'
Mm.
um, friends,
Mhm.
and so you make those connections. Now it's really easy to do this kind of thing, and all the sort of racism, the discrimination, that kind of stuff that happens. I'm not saying it doesn't happen now. Of course it does, but it's much harder to do it now when you've got 50 guys behind you versus, yeah, I'm the only brown Pakistani Muslim kid in the school. What are you going to do? They're now, it's like, have you seen my friends? You want to call me that name again? Because, these guys will take, it's just that sense. And so I think those differences, and then also just the resources that are available to folks, and part of that, libraries. I mean, I think libraries do this extraordinary kind of thing. Like when I was a kid, and now part of that again is the technology and kind of thing there, that we didn't have any money, but I had a library card. And this moment of, I can go to this place and get whatever book I want. I was a smart kid and you love to read. My parents couldn't afford. I mean, you can see my office. I love to read a lot of books here, books on top of books, books piled on places that they shouldn't be piled on. But, you could get those for free. Well, now, the library is the place where you can use the computer. If you don't have a computer, can you go to the library? If you've got a, computer or cell, I mean, everyone has a cell phone now, except for me. That's my one claim to fame. The library at least has the Wi-Fi. You can do those kinds of things, the kind of training, just being able to do like a resume and fill that out. Like, for years when I would go back to visit my parents before they got internet, like, if I wanted to do anything, I'd have to either go to the Tim Hortons or go to the library to, connect to the Wi-Fi, do those things. They don't have a printer. If I wanted to print something, I'd go to the library and log on to one of the computers and print, whatever I need to print out. And so, but where I'm going with this is because the demographics are so different, because the food is so different, as I said, I didn't grow up eating halal food. I'd grow up eating halal food if I moved to Canada now, because you can go to a restaurant and get halal food. Forget about having to drive to a store to do this. I think those kinds of, or the religious experience of the mosque. Like, both my nephews, who are in their 20s have been connected with the mosque, have gone to the, sort of the Sunday school kind of thing, have learned how to, memorize the Quran, that kind of thing. Something that I never would have done, just because you didn't have that opportunity in 1970 Toronto versus, 2024 Toronto.
So in that sense, these opportunities that are provided by educational institutions, libraries, and so forth, for youth to find and reinforce their identity from their ancestry,
right,
and understand that part of themselves. That's an extremely important role that universities are playing. Do you think there are more things that universities can do to, first of all, really help with the whole cultural weaving process of having a very diverse student body, and also to open up greater avenues for understanding of difference? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I look at, it's been almost literally 40 years since I started as undergraduate at the University of Toronto. Now I would be called first to go, first generation. Both my parents worked in factories. Neither of my parents had been to university. you know, um, if you'd asked me in high school, what do you want to be when you grow up? I would have said a doctor, because that was A, the smartest thing I could think of, and B, as an immigrant, the push to succeed, we want you to be a doctor, a lawyer, and, successful sort of thing. I know I have to go to university in order to do this, but I don't have any way of negotiating university because my parents hadn't, been there. And you get there, and within like 5 days, I think the first week, it was like, wait, there's this thing called intellectual. Like, you can get paid to read. You can have an office like this. People would give you books. You get paid to think. How do I get that job? You need a PhD. What's a PhD? And so you go on that trajectory. But where I'm going with that is, as someone who's first generation going to university, and that doesn't matter if you're an immigrant or a native person. We now have programs there for first generation students. This idea of, how do you support students who don't have that kind of thing? Because my parents couldn't help me with university. Here's this, here's the U of T, the University of Toronto catalog. Here's 5,000 courses. Pick five. well, which ones do I pick? I picked my undergraduate college first. The University of Toronto system has a number of different undergraduate colleges. I picked New College because it has an all-you-can-eat meal plan, and as a young man, it was like, that's appealing to me. The meal plan is all you can eat. Thankfully, I had a guidance counselor in high school who was looked at the application and said, why are you picking New College? You're smart enough to get into University College, and University College has a much better scholarship program. So apply to this place because they'll give you more money. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'll apply to that. And so that kind of thing, like, you're looking, like someone's looking out for you at least to be able to say, maybe the all you can eat meal plan isn't, the key thing about university. Maybe it's, and I didn't think about funding, this idea that, oh, wait, different colleges have different histories, they have different money. This place can give me a better scholarship, and that's the other thing. I mean, to think about the support and the money there, like it's funny what you remember from 40 years ago. I get the scholarship that I got from University College was $1,050, which doesn't sound like a lot of money now, but back then it was, because my tuition, it's funny what you remember, my tuition first year at the university was $1,250. And so that scholarship covered almost all the tuition. So I had to pay $200 for tuition. That was easy to come up with. I bet you, I haven't looked, but I bet you right now that scholarship in 2024 is still $1,050, and
Really?
tuition is probably, what's tuition at the University of Toronto now? $10,000, 9,000, 10,000, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like to come up with that. And so that sense of having resources there, having a university that was affordable, and universities are much more affordable in Canada than they are here, and we can get into that a little bit later. But the fact that I teach in a private American university where the sticker price for tuition now, 70% of our students don't pay that full price, but the sticker price is over $60,000 a year just for tuition. Forget about books, forget about room and board, forget about all those kinds of things. So it's like, who can afford, this? And are you getting into, and that's a huge issue in America, of students getting into debt. Now, you have those opportunities. So the system I taught in, the California State University system, great. You can't get a better education for the money here than that system. I use the analogy of cars. You have $30,000 to buy a new car. Get a Toyota Camry. You can't get a better car, for 30,000. You got $250,000. Let me show you this limited edition Mercedes that'll, knock the wheels off that Toyota. It'll cost you 10 times as much, but are you willing to pay that? So anyway, I think back to your original question, some of it is the universities having those support systems. Do you have that sense of, first generation students, first to go students? The sad stuff that you see at universities, I mean, the fact that it's obscene, I think is the only word, to say that there's a network of university food banks, that, the fact that students are food insecure, and you have, food banks at universities, and now you have like networks of universities working on how best to serve your food insecure students. It's like, how do we do this? Like in a country like Canada, in a country like the US, where there's no famine in the land, there's no war in the land. You understand why people are going hungry in places where there's, famine or war or climate change. There's lots of food in America. There's lots of food in Canada, but how many Canadians are food insecure? Because it's about the resources. What do you do? And the fact that universities now have food banks, that students have to access. I think part of it also is, is the university sort of welcoming and understanding things. So again, it's interesting to think about literally 40 years ago, my experience as an undergraduate at the University of Toronto. The residence house that I lived in at University College had 40, it was an all-male residence. So when I say 40 men, I mean literally that, 40 males. 6 or 7 of them were ethnically Chinese, but they were from Singapore, from Taiwan, from Hong Kong, because again, Empire Commonwealth. There's a connection between Britain and Singapore. There's a connection between Britain and, and this was before the turnover of Hong Kong. I don't know what percentage of students at the university now are ethnic Chinese, but it's got to be a much higher number. But it was I guess what I'm saying is, even 40 years ago, it was a high number because of those kinds of connections. But was there support for those students in a way that there is now. I mean, but even the things like, I use consciously the example of the Chinese students, because they were the ones that taught me about Chinese food. They were the ones that taught me about the diversity of Chinese, food. And, this was back when the University of Toronto was right in the middle. You could walk, a couple of blocks up Spadina, and you're in Chinatown.
Mhm.
That's now completely sort of changed over. And now it's more like, Vietnamese and Thai and Cambodian places. The Chinese, of course, like any immigrant community, have gotten wealthy and moved to suburbs. The same thing that, the little India that I grew up with on Gerrard Street isn't there anymore. It's now moved up. Now you want really good Indian stuff, you got to go into Brampton. You got to do like, but it's the sense of people, getting wealthy and moving to the suburbs in the way that other folks
Right,
do. And so what are those kinds of changes? But it was those friends who were like, oh, here's this place, here's how you eat with chopsticks, here's this kind of Chinese food, here's this kind
right.
of Chinese food. So
Well, it's certainly, I mean, I wasn't unaware of the food bank networks on university campuses, but I was aware that it's a growing issue, particularly at Queen's University. And they've offered a summer program on the SDGs.
hmm.
So, that seems to be a growing awareness that, we have to look at all of the sustainable development goals that have been identified, because the students on campuses are going to be affected by all of the issues behind them. And it certainly seems from what you're saying that is really an opportunity for universities to get behind resilience projects that involve the students producing their own food. If there's room on a campus, and there usually is, for, training students on the basic skills. I've been invited to a think tank at a local college on housing and shelter. That's not something that, would have been a concern during any of the years I was at University of Toronto either.
No, absolutely. And that sense of precisely of, like I was a city kid, so I didn't, have any exposure to, food. Like I thought food came the way God intended from the supermarket. Like, then you realize, oh no, this is not, where does this come from? What do you do? And then that whole sense of urban gardens, what you're able to do, even within the city. And then you think about the sort of resources that, again, living in Parkdale, we had no money, but we had time. And, my mom would take us, and now that I think back on it, it was probably 3 hours. Like, we'd walk down Jameson Avenue where I lived, over the Gardner, down to Lakeshore and play at the thing. I learned how to swim at, Sunnyside Pool when it was actually a pool and not this sort of pavilion, things like that. But we probably spent like 3 hours every day there. And you realize, because it's probably a half hour to walk there. We played for an hour and a half, and, half hour, 40 minutes to walk back. Because, when you're poor, you have no money, but you have time. And so
Mhm.
you can take 3 hours and do, because what else are you going to do?
Right.
There. But where I'm going with this is that this idea that, poor people need to have access to green space, to public spaces. We lived in an apartment, but I had this huge expanse, of land right up against Lake Ontario that I could play in, kind of thing. And so that sense of the folks that live in apartments, do you have access to gardens? Do you have access to, plots of things? What can you do on your garden? I mean, what can you do on your balcony? But do you have access to these kinds of things? And that helps tremendously. Like I've a dear friend of mine here in Los Angeles who about 10 years ago created this organization called Food Forward, which is a sort of gleaning thing. You live in places like Los Angeles where people literally have avocado trees and pomegranate trees and fig trees and orange trees. And,
Mhm.
avocado trees sound great until you realize there's 300 avocados, and, you get tired of making guacamole, 2 days, 2 times every week, sort of thing. So you're trying to get rid of your avocados. Well, there's lots of folks who I'd love to have fresh avocados. I'd love to have, fresh figs or fresh oranges. And so it started off as just this gleaning kind of thing. And then you realize, oh, you can then take this, put this, into the food bank system, because of course the things that the food banks need are the, non-perishable, the canned, protein, the beans, that sort of stuff. And so if you can supplement that with, avocados and figs and oranges and things like that, great. But, how do you do that? How do you do you have the spaces like in Los Angeles where you have that, or like where you are, anywhere in the, Kingston, Picton, where there's still farmland, where there's still things
Yes.
there, very different if you're living in the heart of the city where there is no, like the closest parkland is, the lakeshore.
Yeah. No, it's really important to have community allotments, to have balcony gardening nowadays, really just to keep up that consciousness of food is not expendable.
Right.
We really shouldn't be throwing out as much as we do.
Right. No, no, absolutely, absolutely. And that sense of, where are we producing this? How are we doing this? Is it the small family farms? Is it the big places? We were talking about this earlier before we came on that, the last place I lived in Toronto before I moved to Los Angeles was the Roncesvalles, Dundas West, High Park area.
Mhm.
And part of that was, a conscious decision because you wanted to be, by, High Park and the park and, green spaces, that sort of thing. Part of it was, again, the conscious decision of, oh, this is this really interesting, like Roncesvalles, Dundas West, where is that old European kind of thing of, there's 5 different stores that sell fruits and vegetables. There's 3 different bakers. There's 2 different butchers, and so you can go to these places. This was the place I would go to get my fruits and vegetables, and this was the place I would go to get my meat, and this was the place I would go to get my, baked goods and things like that. And it was all, walkable. Didn't have a car then, and so you're taking the subway. And again, that's the nice thing about living in a city with a great subway system. You're literally on the subway line. You can take 6 stops, 7 stops to, I forget what it was, to the university,
Mhm.
but you're there. You can take the streetcar that goes right down to the lake. From my apartment, I had a view of Lake Ontario. But again, that sense of, are you in a place where you have this kind of access to food,
Mhm.
and that's been really interesting, now where you see so much of this being like, these conglomerations and these big corporations that sell the stuff. But again, that goes back to my old thing about, yeah, as a kid, this is, you get food from the store. You don't think about growing the food.
Mhm.
I say to my students all the time, like, I eat meat, but if you give me a cow and a cleaver, I'm a vegetarian because I have no idea how to kill this. I have no idea how to, you give me a strip loin, I can do wonders with it. I don't know where the strip loin is on the cow. I don't know how to get that. I'm thankful someone does,
Mhm.
and so again, it's that sustainable thing. Like, do we eat more meat than we should precisely because I'm not having to do it myself?
Mhm.
And I think those are the kinds of things. And then that moment of like moving here, and again having stuff that literally is off the trees, and realizing that's the difference between, the avocado that is picked fresh off the avocado tree versus the one that's, picked unripe from Mexico and transported in a truck and sent. Like, I never liked avocados in Toronto. I love avocados here, and it's like, oh yeah, how much of that was because the avocados I ate in Toronto weren't fresh avocados? They were like, picked unripe and transported and sent to you, versus the ones here literally off someone's tree, and they're fresh. And that sense of, you eat things, and again, it's privileged to live here, where you have these growing seasons, where you can do these kinds of things, pretty much year round. But that sense of, spring peas, or these berries that come in the spring versus these, root vegetables that grow for the fall, very different, in that sense of, wait, tomatoes actually have flavor, like they actually are, not just these slices of things that you put. Like, I never liked tomatoes in my sandwiches, and then you realize, all right, because again, it's the same thing. Like, these weren't fresh tomatoes grown in someone's yard. They were, factory grown and grown to look beautiful but taste like paper. It wasn't until I got here again, and you're going to like farmers markets and things like that, that you realize, wait, these things actually taste really good. Yeah.
So there's a lot of opportunities for immersive training in
Oh yeah.
waking up the senses.
But especially in places, where you have access to these kinds of things. And again, I
Mm,
think that's that sense of universities, that the internationalization is a whole other kind of thing of, do you like, I happen to teach here at Loyola Marymount, a Jesuit university. The Jesuits as an order were global before we'd heard of sort of globalization. They were doing a lot of missionary work. And
mm,
so built in the DNA of the school is this sense that the world is the world, not just your little tiny corner of it. And so do you educate, folks, and we've in the last couple of years since I've been here, and probably the last 10 years, have really made a concerted push to get more international students, which isn't, we're fortunate in the sense that a lot of American schools, for that matter, a lot of schools are dealing with, declining student enrollments, things that we're doing just fine. I think partly because we're this really interesting campus, we're this great location. We always win awards, like the top 5 most beautiful campuses, things like that. We're in a population center that's like 18 million people, within an hour's drive of us. So, there's a lot of stuff happening. So we didn't need to go to international students like some schools do in order to,
right.
meet the declining students. I think for us, it really was the sense of, no, we want to create students that are world citizens. We
Mm,
want our students to encounter, 75% of our students are from the state of California, another 15-20% are from the rest of the US, but about 5 to 10% growing now are international students. And again, it's that sense of, we want our students to connect with the world. We want students from the world to come here. And that's one of those things that, you know, and I say that now, having lived in America for 25 years, one of the things America is really good at is higher education. Anyone's list of the top, universities in the world is going to have half a dozen American universities. You have the usual contests about, is it Harvard? Is it Princeton? Is it, University of Chicago? Is it UCLA? Is it Berkeley? Is it MIT? Whatever. But you're going to have a bunch of American schools
mm,
there. And then this American thing that we really don't have in Canada, where I teach a small liberal arts college. The fact that my big class is 30 students, my small class is 18 students. I didn't have a class at the University of Toronto of less than like 300, I think, till I was a junior. Like, I still remember the legendary Psych 100 course taught by, Barney Gilmore. And you get your you get your scheduled classes, and this is back in the day before computers or anything like that. It's literally mailed to you at home, and it says, here's this class, Psych 100 Convocation Hall. Now, I knew that Convocation Hall was, the hall where we literally did convocation, was a 2,000 seat, indoor theater. So I literally called up the registrar's offices. There must be some mistake. Like, you tell me
mm,
this class is in Convocation Hall, and they're like, no, it's in the hall. I'm like, well, I know there's some like rooms. Is it one of the rooms? Like, no, stupid. I mean, they didn't say stupid, but no, it's in the hall. You get there. Remember, I went to a high school with 800 students. Psych 100 had like 1,500 students in this thing. Again, where I'm going with this is that the liberal arts college, the small kind of
mhm.
thing where I know my students by name in the third week of class. None of my professors knew me by name in the first 2 years that I was at University of Toronto, because you're one of 300. My TAs may have known me, but they were more interested in, finishing off their PhDs than they were in
Right.
teaching. And so all this to say that you have people coming here precisely because, oh, it's this small environment. It's this really nice place. It's a fabulous, place to go to school. Like, if you walk around my campus, the students are generally and genuinely happy. You don't get that sort of downcast sort of
Mm.
look, because it's like, how could you be sad when you can literally see the Pacific Ocean from my campus? You can literally see, some of the skyline of downtown Los Angeles. Like, it's a beautiful place to be. You know, people come here.
And I would expect then there's not an issue about youth engagement in extracurricular things or compared to at a larger education center. And
No,
in general, I mean,
yeah.
youth engagement is really a big topic nowadays. how to
Absolutely.
encourage it. And you were a very good example of, in spite of all the numbers that you were faced with at University of Toronto, you were extremely engaged during your student years there.
Oh
So,
no, and I love that because for me part of that was this is amazing. You can do this. You can do this. All that kind of stuff.
mm,
And I've always been sort of people. I like people. It's like, oh, I can do this. I can do that. But exactly to your point that when I taught for 8 years in the Cal State system at Cal State Northridge, very much this big state school, very much a commuter school. Like people would come there. They would go to their classes and they would go home or more likely to their jobs or working you know um even then, like I haven't taught it at Northridge since 2005. I think the average age of our undergraduate then was like 24, 25 years old. Like every single class that I taught, and I was in my 30s when I came out there was someone older than me. Here at Loyola Marymount, it's that traditional 18 to 21, 22-year-old undergraduate. I can count on one hand the number of students that I've taught as undergraduates who are older than like 22. And there's a reason for that. Like something happened, they had to, do something else, and then they sort of came back.
mm,
Half of our students live on campus. 90% of them live within like 2 miles of campus. So it's very much exactly this culture of you're on campus, you're doing things, the activities. We have a Center for Service and Action. We do all sorts of things. That there's a very active student club life. The engagement of the students in lots of really interesting ways, whether it's around religion, ethnicity, academic interests, other kinds of interests. Very different model than, no, I'm just here to go to class and then I got to go home and take care of my family or
yeah.
work or do things. I mean, like, my friends and I worked basically during school for drinking money. Like we went out, we worked to be able to go out. These students are working to pay the rent. They're working to pay their parents' rent. They're working to pay their tuition. They're working to pay their kids' daycare. Like those kinds of things. Our students, meaning my students now at Loyola Marymount, very much that traditional 18 to 21-year-old come to campus, live on campus, be engaged, in things, and we expect that here.
Right.
Like I said, over half of our students live on campus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which and part of that is you simply physically could not do that at the University of Toronto. I mean, again, that's this history of I mean, this accidental history. Like you look at the early pictures of the University of Toronto, and it was out in the middle of nowhere. It was out in fields, like the famous sort of, they have it. I think they moved it to Osgoode Hall, the cow gate, like the gate, because the cows from the farms would get on the property, and it's kind of disrupting, when you have cows walking around, and so you come up with these gates to keep the
Mhm.
cows off the field. Well, Toronto grows up around the university. You just simply couldn't put. I mean, I don't know how many tens of thousands of students are at the University of Toronto now, but you couldn't put those students in residence. You'd have to build like 10 high-rise buildings to put all those students.
Right, right. Yeah, well, I mean that we come back to the housing issue, one of
Right.
the basic securities, and having an educational experience that allows you to focus on what you're there for is certainly a luxury today as well.
Well, and it wasn't, and now that I think about it, back then, because I was fortunate. My parents lived in Oakville, so I wanted to live in residence. Didn't want to make that commute because that would have been a little too long, to do that kind of thing. And so I lived in residence for the 4 years as a graduate at the Sir Daniel Wilson residence, at University College, and that was a very different experience because again, you're there. Like most of my classes literally were across the street, either in the Sidney Smith building or one of the other buildings, on St. George Street. Very different. I'd have to, get up and take the GO train and then the subway to come to class and then just, do the kind of thing. And just even the experience. I mean, you think about it, like you're taking three different classes with three different professors. There's things like I could just go back to my dorm room and drop my books off, get new books, do the kinds of things, study in a way that, you got to carry the backpack of the books for three different classes with you. Where do you study? Where do you sit? Where do you eat? Just
Yeah.
those kinds of mechanical things. Forget about the fact that, you've got these guys like, one of the guys I lived with is now, I don't know if he's still the chair, but he was the chair of the physics department at U of T. It's like, that's a smart guy to have. That's a guy that can help you with your physics, because you don't become chair of physics at U of T without being good at physics when you were in first year university.
Right.
And so just that kind of thing. So it's that experience again of being in residence in community, not just the sort of access to things, but having the people to work with, especially going back to what we started with as a first generation. My mom couldn't help me with that physics homework. My dad couldn't help with that psychology homework. Neither of my parents had been to university.
Yeah.
But these guys could.
Right. Yeah. So the professional and social networking opportunities are really an important part.
Oh yeah. No, you go back and I think about, okay, so who
Yeah.
are my closest friends now from undergraduate university days? Well, one of them is vascular surgeon now at St. Mike's. One of them is investment guy. One of them runs like a media company. One's already retired as a lawyer. And so you have those
Mhm.
sorts of things. And part of that comes from, going to these places where you have people that will become, important. One of my friends is now, I believe, the Chief Justice of the Family Court in Ontario. So, but it's that kind of thing of, you work your way up and do those kinds of connections, and you have that uh, uh, ability that you just didn't have, had I stayed in Oakville and worked like my dad did, building trucks for Ford.
Absolutely.
Very different kind of world. I think that's the educational thing. That's that immigrant experience of, yeah, I want you to. I mean, I can't tell you how many guys, and it's just funny, like pointing about the shirt that I'm wearing, at the assembly line, because I worked summers in the assembly line, paying for which paid for everything, back then, who would say, yeah, we wear these overalls, so you can wear this kind of shirt. Like, like we want you to work with your head, not with your hands. I tell my students that all the time. Look, there's two kinds of jobs in the world. There's the kind of job where you take a shower and put on a clean shirt before you start work. And there's the kind of job where you take the shower once you're finished work. No one took a shower and put on a clean shirt before they went to the assembly line.
Right.
You took the shower when you got home.
Mhm.
For me this morning, yeah, you put on a nice shirt, you take a shower, because, my job is spent doing this with my head, not, physically sweating with my hands.
Right. Right. Well, you've covered a lot of really important things about the differences that people encounter now when they change culture, change country, have to grapple with the various kinds of challenges to their identity and really the kinds of opportunities that may not be available to everybody, unfortunately, but that's really kind of what social innovation is about, trying to offer more so that we can all prosper with the kind of uh, diversity of resources that different humans bring to any
Right.
society and any community.
And say that network, that support. I mean, I think about, my father's friend that I mentioned, the Italian guy who, unfortunately
Mm.
passed away last year. Like, he was instrumental, because when my parents moved to Oakville, we lived in an apartment. You can't afford a house. You don't think about that. And then, this guy who was friends with my dad, worked on the line with them, basically said, hey, like, there's a house on down the street here from where I live that's for sale. You should buy this house. My dad's like, I can't buy a house. What are you talking about? And it's, no, here's what it means. And then like, oh, it's actually not that much more. And then, they sell that house. They buy, I can't remember the numbers, but I'm not quite making it up, but sort of making it up. They buy that house for like $40,000 and sell it, 10 years later for $100,000, and use that money to buy a house, where they now live, that they bought for $220,000. It's now worth $1 million. And it's that kind of, like the generational wealth that home ownership, brings. Had it not been for this guy who said, wait, you're paying $200 a month in rent for your apartment, that you can get this house and this kind of, but just that kind of thing, and that sort of support from someone who'd been there only a couple of years earlier,
Mhm.
but and so many immigrants rely on exactly that kind of, who's the person who's done this, who knows how to do this, who says, no, here's what you need to do. I mean, like the library, like that was, one of my mom's friends was, again, it's like, oh, you've got kids, you should get them library cards. And my mom's like, what's a library? There's no public library system in Lahore that, and so that sense of, oh, wait, I can go here and we just fill out some stuff and you get a card and you can take, well, this is amazing, and this boy likes to read. This is great, but that sense of, if no one had said, hey, get your kid a library card, or, hey, you can actually afford to buy this house and you'll be better off in the long run, they wouldn't have done that.
Yeah. Yes. Community support can be fairly simple in terms of information exchange and really being able to predict the things that somebody may not have had the experience of yet.
Right,
And
right. And the kind of research, like I said, the public libraries is great research. What do you do if you come to a country where you don't have
yeah,
such a thing?
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So opening up the spaces where we can exchange this kind of information with each other is just getting more and more important all the time with the population shifts that are going on
Right.
all around the world. So, well, thank you again for agreeing to be part of this recording. And I really value all the insights that you have given us about how we can go about building community on diversity. So thanks again.